Good morning, dear students. How are you this week? I do hope that everyone is okay and well. No, so welcome for another week of learning for CRPH, no, readings in Philippine history. No, so I cannot have our face-to-face classes this week because of the conflict in schedule and for the inconveniences, no, because of the scheduling and because also the status of uh, the room conditions, no, which is quite difficult, as well as the limited time, no, the 1 hour time allotted to us. So it's quite difficult, no, to discuss all the topics or to discuss in full the discussions for this particular course. That's why I have taken the initiative to have this lecture, recorded and uploaded in YouTube. So this is also the same medium or the same recording that I will be expecting from you in doing the facilitated topic. Now you're going to record your uh, presentation and you're going to discuss, the key points. You don't have to discuss everything. Just select the key points in your report and then discuss in class. You can cite examples and you can also share your experiences. So for this particular recording, I am using Zoom. This is a Zoom application. I am recording through my PC. You can also do this recording in a laptop or in a phone. So I will be recording this one, and then later I'm going to upload this either to Google Drive or through YouTube. So I'm now going to screen share. Uh, this is some. Okay, so I do hope that my slide is visible to everyone. So this is how you're going to do as well your presentation. Okay, so we are discussing Unit 1. So we had already discussed a bit. We had introduced already, but let's just try to go back and try to discuss it in full. Although we had started discussing already a background of uh, the projection or the direction that you want to do in this particular course. So course readings in Philippine History Unit 1 covers our introduction to history. So basically, when we talk about Unit 1, it just give you the broad ideas of what is history. Like I mentioned previously in class, uh, what separates our understanding of history, from our previous orientations way back in elementary, way back in high school, that it's just a long narrative, isang mahabang kwento tungkol sa kasaysayan, mga iba't ibang kaganapan, iba't ibang mga tauhan at iba't ibang mga petsa at mga lugar, isang mahabang kwento, no, ng ating kasaysayan. But there is more to it. Aside from that, no, the next level of our understanding of history is that it is an academic discipline. This is an academic discipline. When we say that it is an academic when we say that it is an academic discipline, it means that it has a philosophy. We will discuss two philosophies later. No? Philosophy meaning a perspective, or a certain way of analyzing and interpreting events, in history, philosophy, as well as methodology. Methodology means what are the different techniques, what are the different processes, how is the process conducted, how is the methodology observed using various methods in order to analyze the authenticity, the authenticity of the sources presented, as well as to properly analyze and interpret the content of those sources. No, so that's a new information for us. No, when we talk about history. No, that again, history it's not just a long narrative. No, a sequence of historical stories. No, from the pre-Spanish, the time of Magellan to the time of the Katipunan and so on. But it's more of an academic discipline as well, no, wherein we adopt uh, certain philosophies and theories, lenses, and these philosophies and lenses affect, what type of methodology, what type of procedures we are going to use in order to scrutinize, analyze, and interpret, no, events in history. No, so in full, no, in the four lessons, if I'm not mistaken, we have four lessons for Unit 1. So the composition of these four lessons cover the following. No, number one, to assess and analyze historical narratives. No, uh, number two is to examine and evaluate the evidence. No, evidence sources. No? So the I think I had mentioned this before. No, when we talk about sources, we have the primary and the secondary sources. No? How do we examine? How do we evaluate whether these sources are factual, whether these sources are reliable, whether these sources are valid? And number three also is quite important, is to appraise, or evaluate, assess, how important are these analysis, how important are these events happening in history, what are the significance after analyzing, after comparing the various sources, uh, uncovering different layers in significant events in our history. Then it's also good to evaluate, the value and the contribution of these historical events in the social and national development of us Filipinos and the Philippines as a country. Okay, so that's main the main summary of history as an academic discipline. So we now go to lesson one. Lesson one is discuss the meaning of history. So in particular, we're going to discuss definition and the dimensions, definition and dimensions of history. So these are the three important components that you should remember, in terms of uh, capturing what is history. So these are the definition and dimensions. Number one, when we talk about history, the most the instant definition is that it is a study of the past. It's a scrutiny. It's a reflection of everything that had happened way back in time. It's the study of the past. That's the number one definition of what is history. And number two, this is the this is the new dimension. That's quite new for us. Not only that it is about the past, but it is a type of study. There is a This is actually a form of research. This is also a form of inquiry. Like what I've said in the previous slide, it's an academic discipline. Where there are philosophies and there are methodologies that are prescribed, that are followed, no, that are being done step by step in order to uh, determine determine or verify events in the past, as well as uh, inquire or contextualize, no, or interpret the events happening in the past, no. So uh, history, no, is also a type of research or a type of inquiry, no, an inquiry into the past, no. And the last important component is that it is concerned of human activities. Okay, so history is all about the happenings, activities, significant events that had relevant repercussions in our present time, and specifically, it is about human activities. So again, when we try to define history, it is a type of research or inquiry of human activities happened in the past. Okay, so again, when we talk about history, no, how we are supposed to understand history in our present course, no, for this particular course, the expectation on how we are going to define, how we're going to understand history in this level, no, in our present level, no, we're no longer talking about the elementary or the high school level, no, the present level of how we are going to understand history is that it is a type of research or an inquiry about human activities that had happened in the past. Okay, so you can pause this video and you can jot down that particular narrative or that particular definition for future reference. Okay, so again, these are the main components that I have mentioned earlier. It's human activities, you know. So history, it's not about God, no, or gods, although there are mentions, no, in there are written text about God or the gods. But when we talk about history, we are only focusing about human history, not the narrative of the gods that they had worshipped, no, nor the legends or the mythical creatures, that are not scientifically proven to exist. It's not also about animals and plants. No, so again, history, the scope of history is only focused on human activities. Second is that it is a science. No, so history is also a branch of science. So how do we say that it's a branch of science? Because uh, it it follows a certain procedure. It follows a system of rules. It follows a specific flow of methodologies in order to arrive at particular answers and to scrutinize whether these answers or whether these facts are factual or fake news. So history is a scientific endeavor or a scientific activity of inquiry, in which the objective is to find answers, no, and not just find, and right after that you find the answer, no, right after that you had identified what happened, the next also is to make sense. Why did it happen in the first place? What do you think are the motives? It's also important to determine what are the motives, what are the factors, what are the contributed influences that contributed to the culmination of that particular event. No, like I think I had mentioned it in class that uh, uh, si Rizal hindi lang siya basta binaril. No, hindi lang siya basta binaril na wala lang. Trip lang ng mga Espanyol or trip lang ng mga Kastila na barilin si Rizal. Napakarami pang mga kaganapan, marami pang mga factors, marami pang mga kadahilanan kung bakit siya nabaril noong December 30, 1896, if I'm correct. No, so it's also important to know na what are the other factors, what are the other events, what are the tipping points that had contributed to that specific event. Scientific, because like what I said earlier, no, it is systematic. It has a methodological collection of data and evidence, and it observes analysis, cross-analysis with other sources, interpret, infer, and eventually make conclusions. So these are just some of the methods. No? These are the methods being observed in history. No? In history as a type of research or a type of inquiry. No? Analysis, cross-analysis with other sources. You interpret, you infer, and eventually you make your own conclusions. No? So hopefully we will have that opportunity in this course. No? Na not only do we research, not only do we research events in the history, like what you did in your birthday history, you were able to identify important events that had happened uh, on the same date of your birthday, but in a different period. But also, reflect, reflect and analyze. Aside from those events happening, ano pa ba yung mga implications? Ano pa ba yung mga impact ng mga events na yon, later on in our timeline, because these events were recorded, yung mga birthday, yung mga historical birthday that I have asked you, these events that you have taken note, these are historical events, and they are identified as historical events because they have impact, they have altered the course of our present time. That particular event had an altered our historical timeline. So that will be our objective also. Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to analyze, what are the significance, what are the implications of those events later in our historical timeline. And of course, concern of the past, like what I've said. But it's not just listing down. We're not just in like in elementary and all, in high school. We do inventory. Inventaryo kita at mga events, inventaryo kita at mga tao, inventaryo kita at mga petsa sa kasaysayan. So that's just the first level. That's just the first level aspect of history. But the most important aspect, is to understand, to answer, and understand why it had happened in the first place, and ano yung mga implications in the present time. Okay. So here are the origins of the history. Just a quick discussion of the origins of history. The famous historian, the first is Herodotus. He is the first historian. He was the first historian to. He was the first historian to make scientific, and concrete recording of history during his time. So yung kanyang approach of history is the he is recording, no, kung ano yung mga nangyayari, no, kung ano yung mga kaganapan during his time, no. So he is recording those events, no, because for him, recording of these events will be important, no, for future generations for reference. No, they're going to go back to the things that he had wrote, no, and they're going to learn insights. No, they're going to learn from the things that he had written. No, so Herodotus was really the first historian to make a full account of the things that had happened during his time. No, so another predecessor or another a disciple of Herodotus, no, the one who had continued his work, no, Thucydides. Yung kanyang approach naman the in terms of documenting history, it's more scientific data, no, more scientific data. Ang ibig sabihin, Thucydides, hindi siya more on hearsay, no, hindi siya more on ano, talagang more objective siya in terms of really going to the particular event, no, really talking, no, really talking to the persons involved or persons witnesses of that particular event, no. So si Thucydides, yung pinagkaiba niya kay Herodotus is that mas pina-objective pa niya yung kanyang study of history, no, mas scientific, mas credible siguro, and less bias, no? Less bias because hindi niya binigyan ng maraming personal na interpretation, but what he included in his study, especially in his documentation of the Peloponnesian War, is that he tried to focus more on the actual accounts, on the actual evidence, no, on the actual narrative of those persons, of the very persons involved, no, in that particular event. No, so he focused on the oral sources of the particular event. So those two, Herodotus was the first one, and then Thucydides was the second. These are the prominent historians, no, that had really started, no, history as an academic discipline, no, in terms of recording, documenting, and processing historical events, no, for future references. And of course, after that, no, nung nagkaroon na ng written history, when written history becomes available, no, so it became more convenient to record, document, and study history, no, because that at that time, now when people become more literate, became more literate, no, when people became more accessible, when people had an access to writing, writing their thoughts, writing events. So it's more easier to study history because you have a written record as reference. No, during the time of Herodotus and Thucydides, it's difficult to study history because there are no libraries. No, there are no written document na you can read and get information. No, during their time, you have to go to that particular place. You have to talk directly to the people. But during the written history, it's become much easier because of the availability of written documents. And because of this written history, it's become much more easier to study periods beyond your lifetime. No, for example, no, sa panahon natin ngayon, no, hindi ganoon kahirap malaman at pag-aralan yung mga nangyari sa panahon ng Katipunan or sa panahon ng pananakop ng mga Amerikano kahit na wala tayo doon, no? Kahit wala tayo sa panahon ng mga Katipunero, no? Kahit hindi natin personal na nakita or nakilala natin si Rizal, No, it's easy to know him, to know his work. This is in thanks because of the written records, no, which we can access and we can analyze. No, so written history is such a game changer because it enables us to study events in the past. No, even though that we didn't have the opportunity to live there, or we didn't have the opportunity to interview the persons or the people in that particular period. So this is a brief history of the origins of history, the forefathers of history. So here are the issues and concerns, no, the primary philosophy, positivism, no. So according to the philosophy of positivism, it says that real knowledge lies in the actual observation of facts. No? So according to this philosophy, history should be the actual observation of facts. No, na it's difficult to claim an event happening in history if you were not, number one, if you were not able to observe it directly, no, uh, or for instance, there is no actual witness to it, there's no living witness to that particular event, and there is no document at written during that period that says or that documents the existence or the happening of that particular event. No, therefore, according to positivism, their approach in history is that if there is no document, if there is no surviving written document about that particular event, then for them, that particular event didn't happen in history. No, hindi yan nangyari kasi wala record. No, para sa kanila, ah, hindi nabuhay ang tao na yan kung walang birth certificate, no, walang marriage certificate, walang death certificate kasi walang papel na nagsusupport. No? So yun yung kanilang pananaw, no. Yun yung philosophy ng mga historical positivists, no. If there's no evidence, there's no written document, then that particular event did not happen in history. But as later historians, no, they eventually challenged that particular notion, no, because it's that particular thinking is very limited, no, limited because uh, in the document, no, it cannot contain all the truth. Hindi naman lahat ng events, hindi lahat ng mga bagay ay uh, makikita sa isang papel or sa isang document. No? So there are a lot of people, especially in the historical periods, no, na hindi marunong magsulat. May mga civilizations na wala silang method of writing to document everything, but that doesn't mean that they didn't exist. So clearly my limitation. And the other is that written document is also biased to figures of high historical importance. No, because commonly sa ating kasaysayan, yung mga sinusulat o yung mga nire-record lang at that time ay yung mga taong may mga nasa mataas na posisyon. No? For example, yung mga hari, yung mga gobernadorcillo, mga kilalang tao. No? Kagaya nila, for instance, si Jose Rizal. No? Jose Rizal was a prominent ilustrado. So maraming naisulat tungkol sa kanya. No? Marami rin siyang sinulat tungkol sa kanyang mga talambuhay. But how about the other heroes, no, like sila Melchor Aquino, sila Gregorio del Pilar, Teresa Magbanua, no, the lesser heroes. No, how about their truth? No, how about the events that had happened to them? No, just because na kulang or konti yung mga legal or the mga written records about them, does that mean that wala na silang naiambag or wala silang historical significance to our history. No? So there are limitations to the philosophy of positivism. Okay, so because of that, no, historians later in the timeline had explored also other sources, no, other sources aside from actual written documents. No, so they had also accepted, no, historical content from epic, no, yung mga kwentong bayan, no, that is uh, hand down through oral tradition, songs, artifacts, no, yung mga nahuhukay na mga gamit, no, nahuhukay na what do you call this, mga remains, architecture, no, in the designs of buildings. They tell a lot of stories, no, from temples, churches, houses, old houses, no, they tell you a certain story, no, at that particular period. And memory, no. Okay, other disciplines, no, aside from these other sources, historians, especially in the recent period, also consult other disciplines, no, to confirm uh, basis or facts in the particular happening. No? So they also consult archaeologists, no, archaeologists studies human remains as well as artifacts being recovered. Linguistics, no, they study traces how language in a particular area had developed or evolved. Linguistics can also trace the composition of influences in that particular language. No? Like for instance, some of the terms used are influenced from Chinese. Some of it are influenced from Spanish. No, so just by analyzing the linguistics of a particular people, you can tell already that perhaps in the past there has been interactions between Chinese and Spaniards because their language, because the locals had incorporated or adopted some concepts, no, were borrowed from Chinese and Spaniards. No, so linguistics, no, just analyzing the origins of the words in the languages can already tell you, can paint a story, no, of the interaction between that particular group, between another dialect, between another group of people. Also, biologists and geneticists. No, geneticists, just like language, you can also uh, identify, in our genes, in our blood samples. For example, kung sa atin, especially sa mga Filipinos, using geneticist, pwede mong ma-identify, no, kung ilang percent ka Hindu or Indiano, ilang percent ka Chinese, ilang percent kang Kastila, no? You can also trace your genogram, no, or your ancestors. Ma-identify mo kung may dugo kang Kastila or may dugo kang Dayuhan. So all of these disciplines, no, contribute and help historians puzzle out events, no, or help interpret and analyze events happening in the past. Okay. So there's also another philosophy which is historicism. No? So according to this philosophy, no, they believe that history should be studied for its own sake. No, para sa mga naniniwala sa historicism, para sa kanila dapat ang kasaysayan ay i-reimagine lamang, no, i-recreate, no, parang kumbaga i-describe. Para sa kanila ang pag-aaral ng kasaysayan ay yung pag-describe kung paano yung mga tao nabuhay dati. Na para sa kanila dapat ganun lang ang focus ng history. You're just going to describe how people lived at that time. No, they do not agree. No, they do not agree further analyzing the political, analyzing the societal, cultural aspect ng mga kaganapan, no? Yung mga they are not in favor of putting colors and interpreting the events that had happened. Para sa kanila, they are content on just describing, no, describing what had happened. No? But of course, later historians, no, uh, they challenge this concept, no, and uh, they are not in favor of historicism, no? Marami ang nag-oppose din sa view ng historicism na sabi nila, what's the purpose of studying history if you're not going to put colors, if you're not going to analyze and dig deeper to get the insight and learn from these events in a more critical manner, no? So through our historical timeline, these are the different developments, no? Kumbaga, these are different fashions in the study of history, no? Nagkaroon ng fashion about historical positivism, nagkaroon ng fashion about historical historicism, no? But eventually, uh, the study of history is dynamic and ever changing, no? And therefore they are eventually replaced with another approach naman depending on the need being asked. Okay, so next, we will have the historiography. What is historiography? So historiography is the study of history. How did history develop as a historical discipline? How was historical fact or assumption established? So, for instance, the death of Jose Rizal, like what I mentioned earlier. So when we talk about historiography, how was the death of Jose Rizal documented as a historical event? Now, who were the authors who wrote about the death of Jose Rizal? There are lots of authors, primary and secondary sources who had documented and written about the death of Jose Rizal. What are the context and motives of publication, the sources? What are the methods and analysis that they had used in interpreting that particular event, in identifying the significance and implication of that particular event, which is the death of Rizal. So the essence of historiography is that students should be critical. You should always be critical of what is presented to you. Like what I've mentioned in our earlier discussion, you don't just accept events in history, but you also try to be critical. You have to scrutinize the factualness of these events presented to you. So that's history for you. So there are benefits also of studying history. This is the reason why history is still included in your curriculum. This is the main reason why, despite you're already in college, despite you are a BSHM student, history is still included in your curriculum because of these main benefits. So history affords you to explore multiple ways to view, interpret, and respond to a particular problem. History enables you to learn from the past mistakes of people. So when we learn from mistakes, historical mistakes, it means that we can learn as a person, as individuals, because people in the past had learned mistakes individually. Societies, nations had also made mistakes in the past. So we individually as persons, we collectively as a nation and a society can learn from these mistakes, and improve our status improve our present condition. Now, from history, we can also gain insights, alternative choices, not only just mistakes, but the alternatives. What are the options that we did not choose in the past? So we can learn from these alternatives, and maybe we can try exploring taking these alternatives. Good ideas. The history is also full of good ideas wherein we can borrow, we can adapt, and utilize to improve our present standing. No, history also affords us to have a better control of our present and future, and most importantly, history gives us a sense of self-knowledge, better self-knowledge. When we say self-knowledge, history sorry for the technical error. So sense of self-knowledge, we through history, we will have an insight, of the things that we can do and the things that we haven't done yet. So if you are uncertain, if we are uncertain as an individual, if we are uncertain as a nation, as a country, we can always go back to our history, and we can know, we can ascertain, na pinagdaanan na natin yan. Nangyari na yan sa atin dati. We were able to overcome that. Nalampasan natin yan dati. So, there's no reason bakit hindi natin kayang lampasan yan ngayon. So, these are important lessons. Important lessons that we can give us strength, fortitude, and resilience to overcome challenges in the present as well as in the upcoming future lessons that we have from our history. Okay, so that wraps up our discussion, our online lecture this morning. This is the reference that I have. So for next week, these are the take-home readings that I want you to read in advance. Lesson 2. Lesson 2 discusses more about who is the historian, the tasks and challenges of the historian. Lesson 3 are about the historical sources, primary and secondary. And lesson 4 talks about the Philippine historiography, the development of history as a discipline in the Philippines, wherein prominent historians will be taught in this chapter, as well as the various developments, various philosophies adapted in different periods in our historical timeline. So kindly read it in advance. I might give oral recitation or surprise quiz for that next meeting. So this is your written test for today. Written test 3 is Filipino historian. This is in anticipation for the lecture next meeting. So for this morning, I want you to go to the library. You may search for books if there is available, or you can connect in the Wi-Fi in the library. There's also computers in the library which you can borrow. So I want you to research for notable Filipino historians. Just give one. Give one Filipino historian in any timeline. In any timeline. Just one notable historian. Provide a brief narrative. Who is this historian? Just important information about this one historian. Identify their notable works. The scope of the historical timeline that they had documented or emphasized. Was this historian, if this historian focused, for instance, on the Katipunan Revolution, or if this historian had focused on the life of Rizal. So that's up to you. You have to identify their works, the books that they had published, and the themes and topics covered in these historical books or historical work. So you have also to identify their philosophies or perspectives, in analyzing and interpreting the historical content. So once you have done your research of these materials, you're going to organize your findings in a picture or concept diagram. No? So yung concept diagram, lalagay nyo yung picture, lalagay nyo yung picture ng historian. Now, for example, Herodotus, lalagay nyo yung picture ni Herodotus sa gitna ng kupon or sa gitna ng word. And then you're going to branch. No? Iba-branch nyo yung mga research materials ninyo. Lalagyan nyo siya ng branch out conceptual map or diagram, picture diagram, about the works, the information. So, branch out yung mga different information about this particular historian. So it's up to you whether you're going to draw it in the bond paper or you're going to write it or you're going to do it in a Word or in Paint. It's up to you. And then save it, screenshot it as a picture. Make sure na klaro ka at mabasa. Screenshot your diagram and submit it in the Facebook group that I'm going to do for your section. So thank you very much, dear students. If you have questions, please do PM me in our group chat. So thank you very much. This is Sir Kim for CRPH Readings in Philippine History, #Learning Beyond Skies. Thank you very much and good morning.